And the other R that we talk about when we're analyzing our sources in the annotated bibliography is reliability. So, when you're assessing the reliability of a source, you want to consider who the author is, who the publisher is, when it was published. Is there any evidence that they use? If you scroll down to the bottom of their article, is there a works cited page where they're crediting their information to other reliable sources, or is there bias? So, what you want to consider and what you can see in this image here is the continuum of credibility. And what this is at the top we have things like blogs and personal web pages, and you should be pretty skeptical of these things in terms of their reliability. Um, because it's usually one person's opinion. They usually don't list their sources. And then all the way at the other end, things that you can be a lot less skeptical of are peer reviewed scholarly journals and books from academic presses or other government websites. So these things usually go through a lot of revision before they are ever published. And there's a lot of fact checking that goes into place. So you can definitely trust these a lot more than you can trust a blog or a personal web page. So yeah, just take a look at these things, and when you're looking at a source, ask yourself where it falls under this continuum of credibility. Now let's take a look at a sample annotation. So when you turn this in, this is what it should look like. You have the source listed at the very top, and it's listed the way that it would appear in your works cited page. And then the beginning portion is the summary. So they're telling us what the article is talking about and what some of the main key points are. And then you have the analysis of the source. So this student is saying this source is credible because the New York Times is an online newspaper that has a reputation of being a generally reliable source of news. Although this source is credible, it should have showed more research like tables, graphs, and cite them in order for the audience to clearly understand what's going on. So the student is listing some of the positive attributes of the source and maybe some of its shortcomings, and that's the same sort of thing that you want to do when you are creating your annotations. So for every source, keep in mind that it should be relevant to your subject, your purpose, and your intended audience. It should also be current, especially if currency is an important thing given your topic. You can use historical sources, but just be a little bit cautious with those. And again, that will vary depending on your topic. Reliability is also something that you want to make sure is in your sources. Some bias is inevitable, but make sure that you're using a variety of sources so as to represent several points of view without becoming biased in your own work. And then we're actually just going to skip this slide. Normally, we would all look at a source together and determine whether or not we think it's credible and talk about it as a class. But because we are sort of limited in our face-to-face interaction right now, we are just going to skip through that. And so let's talk a little bit more about the peer review process, since that is what your first two annotated bibliographies are going to be focusing on. So you need 2 peer-reviewed sources for your A3 assignment, and also 2 of your annotated bibliographies are going to be on peer-reviewed sources. So let's talk about what peer review means. How do we identify a peer-reviewed paper? So peer review and scholarly sources go through a rigorous process in order to be published, and they're typically written by researchers for researchers. So keep in mind that you are not their audience. So a lot of the times are going to be terms that we may not be familiar with. It's going to be dense information. It's written at a PhD level for another person who is a PhD candidate, essentially. So it'll take some time to get through, and that's why I really want you guys to get a head start on this and start looking into your sources early on so that you are able to turn this annotated bibliography in on time. And if you want to click on the link here, this is a video that just talks about the peer review process. If you were at our library day on Thursday, that feels like forever ago, then you already probably watched this, but maybe you could use a little refresher on it. So here are some examples of what a peer review source is going to look like. It typically has more than one author. So as we see in the top left, there's a few different authors for that one. They have abstracts and they'll have things like keywords so that you know sort of what it is about. Your abstract is going to tell you this is what this study is generally focusing on. And they'll have references, a long, long list of references typically. And then if you compare that to a popular sources are often written for a general audience. So they use basic language that's pretty easy to understand. They rarely list citations for their sources, and they're typically shorter, so about 1 to 5 pages long. They also have pictures and colors, so here are some examples of that, like Time Magazine and Newsweek Magazine. So when we take a look at academic sources, they are often written by and for faculty, researchers, and scholars. They use more technical language and vocabulary that is discipline specific, and they include full citations and long lists of citations for their sources, and they're typically longer than 10 pages. And they are mostly text with charts and graphs, and few of the pictures that are included are going to be colorful. So some examples of that can be seen on the right. So we have the Journal of Structural Biology. So any pictures that you see are probably not going to be pictures of people like our popular sources. So let's talk about some of the annotation expectations and requirements. So you're going to be doing an annotated bibliography for a total of 4 sources. But we're splitting this up into your first 2, which are due next Sunday, which are your peer review sources. And then the other 2, so annotations 3 and 4, will be from popular media sources, and those will be due the following Sunday. So for the first 2, you want to make sure that you're getting information from the library databases. They should be reliable, relevant, and recent, and you should be analyzing this in your summary. Your sources should include different perspectives on the issue and represent them fairly, regardless of what your position on this issue is. It should help you identify stakeholders in the issue. So, your sources should give you some indication of who has something at stake. And then it should also help you understand the complexity of the issue and help you identify your own position and support that position within this issue. And ultimately, the point of this is that it should prepare you to write your argument about the issue. And just a note that I encourage you guys to have more than 4 sources, although only a minimum of 4 sources are required. Most of my students that do really, really well on this paper end up having more than 4 sources. So for homework, I want you guys to complete the refining research worksheet that can be found on Canvas under A3 materials. And then I want you to read chapter 9 and chapter 10 in your Joining the Conversation textbook. And also keep in mind that your first 2 annotations are going to be due this Sunday. So make sure that you start working on that. Take a look at the student example if you need to. The research, it's going to take quite some time. I want you guys to be selective about the sources that you decide to use. And so it'll take some looking through a lot of different sources to find the ones that are talking about what you want to talk about in your own argument. Yeah, I know that this is sort of a weird time for everyone, and if you have questions or doubts, or if something goes wrong, technology fails us like it inevitably does, feel free to email me. I'm expecting things to go wrong, so stay in touch with me. Let me know if you have any questions. I will do my best to answer them and to make this feel as as much like a classroom as I can. So, yeah, stay in touch with me.